Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're very pleased to welcome you to our program, and as many outlets are doing throughout the country, and the media, of course, is to deal with our great concern about the security of our country. And after the awful crime that took place in September 2001, we're very pleased to have on our program a member of that organization that can certainly address these issues. I welcome to the program Daryl Wasson, who is the coordinator of Homeland Security for the 5 northern counties of Idaho. Daryl, welcome to the program. Thank you for coming by and giving us a chance to help our viewers, not only in Idaho, but around the region, about things we can do to try to be safe.
Thank you for having me.
And as always, I'm pleased to have Erna Reinhardt, our panelist, and she will commence today's questioning.
Hi, Daryl, and welcome to the program. It's great to have you here. First, before we get into the specifics about the Homeland Security programs and the kind of things that you're doing in your position, take a few minutes to tell us about your background and the kinds of things that you've done to prepare yourself for this job.
Well, the things I've done that are germane to this position primarily would be my military experience in conducting exercises in preparation for units and Homeland Defense as well, international defense.
And then tell us about what you are doing in your position here in Kootenai County as the Homeland Security Coordinator. What does that entail?
Well, my specific position is the exercise coordinator. It's my job to design and conduct emergency response exercises and drills for first responders primarily in response to a terrorist attack involving the weapons of mass destruction. Those include what we refer to as CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, explosive, or nuclear weapons. And it's essentially bringing all the organizations that would be responsible to respond to an event like that, both to protect life and property, but also recover from the disaster.
And is this a new program that is a result of 9/11, or has this been something that's been in place for a while?
Well, the specifics of the program as they stand now are kind of new. Community disaster exercises obviously are not something that's new to communities. They've been doing it for many years to prepare them to be able to respond to natural hazards or accidents. We have here in northern Idaho been conducting disaster exercises in the event of a flood, fire, earthquake, but also accident kinds of things, hazardous materials. We have several pipelines running through northern Idaho, and we've done a specific exercise designed to contain an event like that and to protect life and property. So the community disaster response exercises aren't new, but the fact that we're now introducing the terrorist element into them is a new thing. And it actually goes back to, it has its beginnings after the Murrah building bombing in Oklahoma City in the mid-90s, where the federal government established the Office for Domestic Preparedness as part of the Department of Justice. And it was the first time that the federal government had programs to actually push support and advice down to local jurisdictions, state and local jurisdictions, who are the primarily the people responsible to respond first and most quickly. After the events on September 11th, obviously the program took a whole new meaning and was accelerated extensively. And after that, the Department of Homeland Security was formed, whereas the the Office for Domestic Preparedness fell under their jurisdiction. And Tom Ridge, Secretary Ridge, gave them specific orders that now we will start concentrating on being prepared for terrorist events.
So Daryl, having you here in North Idaho, there must be similar people like yourself.
Absolutely.
Throughout the United
Absolutely.
States, right?
There are 7 of us in the state of Idaho, and there are regions in every state across the United States. And this program is in its infancy. We are developing it as we go, but it's highly accelerated, and it's actually part of a three-tiered approach to Homeland Security as part of the strategy for Homeland Security, the national strategy. Exercises being what I'm responsible for conducting here in northern Idaho, but there's also the equipment that's involved, the new kinds of equipment that first responders would need to respond to the CBRN elements that we discussed earlier, and also the individual training, because although, as we mentioned before, some of the hazards that you could possibly face in a terrorist attack, some of them are quite similar to those chemicals used in industrial purposes, and we certainly have a lot of that being transported over our highways and our railway systems here in northern Idaho and across the country. So it's not that the first responders do not have the equipment that they need to protect themselves and to conduct recovery and to protect the rest of the public. It's just that there's more better equipment coming down. And going with that, with the new equipment, is also the individual training on how to use that particular equipment. There's specific equipment for radiological kinds of events. And even though we don't have anything like that here in northern Idaho, certainly in the south part of the state with INEAL, also central Washington like that. So the exercise is just one of three elements in the whole program. And specifically what my job is to take all the first responders and design a disaster exercise simulating one of the CBRN kinds of events, and as realistically as possible, so that they get the most training value out of it. But the primary purpose of the exercises is not just to test the individuals and to see if the equipment works and whether they know how to use it, but also the plans and the policies and the procedures that are in place for the command and control aspects to get recovery completed as quickly as possible. And it is, we're doing more and more things regionally. We'd mentioned the multiple hazards that we face here in northern Idaho with natural disasters and accidents. Many may remember here the firestorms back in the 90s, and the floods especially are not just isolated to Kootenai County, but if it affects Kootenai County, you can guarantee it's probably in Shoshone County and Benoit, Bonner, and Boundary as well. So we're looking more to regional approaches. We're revising some of our operating plans and policies and procedures to bring in the entire emergency management for northern Idaho. Lots of memorandums of agreements and mutual aid agreements and stuff like that. So we're working more and more as a team with the local and county jurisdictions.
Great.
That's most informative, and as you've already indicated in answering Ernest's question, not only do you have 7 regions in Idaho, in fact, we almost do everything by 7 regions in our state, judicial districts and all those things, which really makes a lot of sense because you can operate on those same basis for many functions. But also, since other states having these regions also, and let us hope it never happens, but if there was to be a disaster, not here, but somewhere else that's fairly nearby but was localized.
Sure.
Do you have coordination too, even across state boundaries? That you're all under Homeland Security.
Absolutely.
But there must be some kind of networking and you all learning from one another as you proceed on this process.
Northern Idaho has had a long-standing collaborative relationship with Eastern Washington, not just in emergency management, but other respects as well. There are future exercises planned that will incorporate all of the state of Idaho. Eventually, we will incorporate Eastern Washington, the entire state of Washington, and have exercises that will test and evaluate procedures for the Pacific Northwest and eventually even Canada. They have already began talks with Homeland Security about future exercise programs that will involve cross-border kinds of incidents. So yeah, we have a very good collaborative effort.
That's very good news, and it's very encouraging. Also along the same line, we're a huge country, and Canada's a huge country, and we have limited resources. And there's been a growing debate, I think, in the Congress in particular, crosses all kind of ideological lines, but that since we have a limited number of resources and that maybe there's some locations that are more at threat, or these awful terrorists tend to look at more places than others.
Sure.
And we're concerned about shipping into the country, and we're concerned about our chemical plants and our nuclear plants and all that. And I'm just going to get your reaction on something, and that is when we have these alerts by color, the yellow or whatever, there's been a growing proposal, and I just wonder if you've heard about it, that some localities around the United States are saying when they appear to be, I have to be cautious on this, but when they appear to be less a target, should we allow different localities not to go into higher alert? In other words, you're talking about the resources they have, and that maybe there should be some state or local decision making along with the national decision making when some localities don't have to go on alert that others do, to spread the resources more effectively. Is that a legitimate point?
I have heard that concern. There's probably a consensus amongst the citizens of northern Idaho and other more rural regions that that we are less at risk than perhaps a major metropolitan area. In my personal opinion, I don't necessarily agree with that. The very nature of terrorism is unpredictability. You don't know when or where, sometimes not even why. Each region has done a risk assessment, both within city, county, and larger regional districts, identifying potential hazards. What are the risks of a terrorist attack on those? And obviously those are probably have some classifications that we can't talk about today. But I would think it would be irresponsible of any community not to take any and all preparations that they could to be able to protect their citizens, protection of life and property. We have to remind ourselves that we do share an international border, like you mentioned. Obviously, it's difficult to predict if a would-be terrorist would choose northern Idaho as a target, but it's certainly possible that they could use it as a transit route through. Right. As far as the risk assessment levels that you were referring to, and the fact that every time the Department of Homeland Security elevates it, that it costs resources, mostly money, is a problem that I'm sure everybody's aware of. However, I think again it would be irresponsible of any community not to take measures when those risk assessments are elevated. You always have to remember also that they're usually non-specific, both in location and time. So it's always the soft underbelly that you have to worry about most.
Thank you. Erna Reinhardt.
The tricky part of your business is that you've got to be prepared for something that you don't even know what you have to be prepared for. So that's got to be a challenge all in itself. But one of the things I wanted you to help us understand better is the scope of what you do when you say that you train the first responders. Talk to us a little bit about the different agencies that are involved, that you are now trying to establish some closer relationships with, and working with them to train them for what could maybe happen someday.
Well, and again, the individual training is not conducted by our organization. It's done usually internal to each first response organization, whether it comes from outside instructors or they go to a resident course or whatever. It's part of their formal training. It's my job to take all the first responders and their abilities to respond to a particular hazard and develop a scenario, a situation, if you would. And we have collaborations from not just the first responders like fire, emergency medical services, local law enforcement, but also the healthcare professionals, the hospitals, the health district is a big player in our community exercise planning. And also the emergency management offices for each county, Boundary, Bonner, Benoit, Shoshone, and Kootenai. There are some federal organizations that eventually will participate in our exercises when we start looking at those that we're doing with Canada, Border Patrol and Customs, as well as FBI, but also state governmental organizations as well will participate. So it all depends on what the hazard is, what the element that we're dealing with is, and we look at the emergency operations plans and we say, okay, if we had a chemical event, who would be the organizations involved in responding to that? So we would ask them to assess their capabilities, first of all, what their objectives are, what they want specifically to test within their procedures, and develop a scenario where we accommodate all of their needs, as well as test our needs at the command and control level, the emergency operations center, to be able to provide logistical support and command and control, and most importantly, communications support to that as well. That being said, even like we were talking about earlier on, just because we're dealing specifically now with the CBRN elements, all the mechanics involved in responding to that disaster are pretty much the same, whether it's a natural disaster or an intentional event. The mechanics involved are very similar, so we're not neglecting one to satisfy the other. The all hazards approach, many of the capabilities and mechanics involved are very much the same. So everybody is involved. Eventually what we're going to do is query all the members of the 5 northern counties to see what their internal exercise requirements are for whatever mandates that they have, whether it be hospital from the healthcare community or the airports or first responders, all have specific exercise requirements that they have to do at a certain frequency. And what we want to try to do is build an exercise that will meet as many of those exercise requirements as possible, to meet those requirements and still meet the objectives that we want to get out to better prepare ourselves for the event of a disaster if it occurs.
I think that point is just so well taken, that as we deal with, and we're going to talk about funding in a moment, but the fact that we've heard so much, and understandably so, about Homeland Security and the terrorist threat and the funds that are being spent there, but what you're saying is that by this really updating of the equipment and the process, this is also helpful to all communities dealing with natural disasters.
Absolutely.
So there's a double effect here with the funding. Sure. In that process.
Absolutely, there is. Take a chemical hazardous material release, especially. You know, we talked about accidents do happen. That's the nature of nature. So yeah, it does. The fact that we may have been less prepared before because of lack of funding in those areas for personal protection of our first responders, mostly. That's the most important. Because if they're not able to survive their initial response because of lack of personal protective equipment, then obviously we've got a bigger problem.
In relation to funding, of course, some of this was already in place, as you just said. Local governments have always had personnel and some equipment to deal with the natural disasters. Now that you're integrating all this together, to kind of break down the funding for us in relation to, of course, those federal funds that are very crucial now, or the state funds or the local funds. In fact, that local governments even have people on fire departments or police or whatever. There's already infrastructure there, but how is that mixed in relation to funding?
And those funding sources are still available. A lot of them are simply being augmented by the new Homeland Security monies that are coming down. Obviously, the Homeland Security exercise program is fully federally funded. In addition to that, the new equipment appropriations that are being done as specified by DHS is coming from the same pot of money as well. There are other Homeland Security related kind of funding streams that are coming through other professional organizations, like you said, the hospitals, the HRSA funding. Panhandle Health District has their own funding source, but again, it is all derived from that central pot of new dollars that we're seeing from the Department of Homeland Security. The funding source, I think, started in 2002, and there was an initial push for equipment and personnel training to last us, I think, longer than a fiscal year, and then the new 2004 appropriation just passed the House and Senate, and we're still waiting to hear exactly how that's going to be divvied up amongst the states. There's questions and concerns that perhaps based on each individual state's threat assessment that perhaps funding may be balanced differently than it was in the past. We just don't know that. But I think we can be rest assured that as long as there is a threat, then there will be programs in place to take care of it,
Sure.
to prepare us for it.
All right, Reinhardt.
Daryl, explain to us a little bit about, and I'm involved in this a little bit, so I know a little bit about it, but only that much. But you have a plan in place that where you are designing an exercise that actually will be tested, I think, here in the next few weeks. I know by the time this airs, it'll be over. But
one of the two will, yes.
Tell us, and that's what I was going to ask you, is that there's different kinds of exercises. So tell us a little bit about that.
In the past, natural hazard disaster exercises have been based around counties' emergency operations plans on how they expect to react to that natural hazard. Now that we're dealing with other kinds of things, and in this case a public health issue, the Panhandle Health District, as well as health districts across the United States, are starting to develop specific plans to address specific kinds of hazards. In this case, it's smallpox that we're talking about. Panhandle Health District put out their plan last year, and we're going to test that this year in two of our upcoming exercises. One next Friday, of which Erna has been a participant in designing the exercise as far as the public information piece. And we're just going to test the command and control procedures. It's going to be centralized. It'll all be simulated. There will be no actions happening out in the field, no moving of personnel or resources. And that's designed to specifically test both the mobilization piece, what we would anticipate doing in day one to put that plan in action, and as well as the internal emergency operations procedures of the command and control group. This exercise is going to be kind of fun because it's the first time that we have exercised the unified command approach, where all 5 counties are coming together to singularly command and control a widespread event. Normally it's been emergency operations center in each county doing some mutual aid, but command and controlling their own piece of the geography. That will be followed by an exercise this summer in June 19th, where we will actually test a clinic operation. The provisions of the plan, if Department of Homeland Security and Centers for Disease Control decided that we would have to do a mass smallpox vaccination nationwide, we would have to vaccinate the entire population of northern Idaho in about 6 to 8 days. So it's quite a monumental task, quite a big thing to try to organize and coordinate. It's not new. There have been mass vaccination clinics done before for natural disease outbreaks here in our local area here in the last couple of years, as a matter of fact. But it is it's quite exciting. And the collaboration between all the players has been outstanding, whether it be governmental organizations or even private industry. We have involvement from local businesses who we would really rely upon in the event of an event to provide us with logistical support. So everybody's pitching in. It's going to be fun. After that, we're going to reassess what our exercise needs are. We're going to mirror it upon the state's plan, who will be mirrored upon the national exercise strategy. And we will decide, once we gather information from all the constituents that we deal with, what their exercise needs and objectives are. Then we will develop a plan and decide what of the other CBRN elements that we will exercise around.
I just want to make a quick comment that from the little bit that I have worked with this whole exercise is the value that all the different agencies are going to come away with from that whole collaboration. I mean, the people, I think, are forming new relationships that they haven't had before, and it's this new sense of being prepared and knowing what the needs are and knowing what other people's role in the whole function is.
Absolutely.
It's a great
and the
benefit.
Relationships that exist here in northern Idaho between everybody, I couldn't ask for better. The collaboration between the first response agency and the governments, the emergency managers, everybody is outstanding. I think you would be hard pressed to find such a cooperative relationship in other parts of the country. And of course, I don't know that. I can't speak to that. All I know is that the relationships have been built for a while.
That's great.
Yeah.
I would just piggyback on that to say that under our federal system, as we've had for over 200 years, when you have a certain role for the national government, a certain role for the states, and states in turn delegating to local governments to do certain things, because of this 9/11 great crime and tragedy, Americans have always had a genius about them, like they did in World War II when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And so it seems to me what you're saying is that this is another time when we realize the need for cooperation. So, and it can I would think, roll over into other things, and that is when the national government, the state and local governments, and even you're saying into Canada, that kind of cooperation will pay many benefits in the future. Would you agree that that's what you're experiencing?
Agree, very much so. The dividends are paying off now for me and the design team, which Ern is a member of, in trying to put the exercise together. The collaboration and relationships that were built in the past through natural disasters. We have an organization, and each county has something very similar called the Local Emergency Planning Committee, which is made up of representatives from a lot of private and governmental organizations, both local and state. And their whole mission in life is to get together and talk about the issues that we have in the multi-hazard arena. This is just a new hazard as part of that. The flood, fire, earthquake, ice storm, and now we have terrorism. It's a very large organization, and it's a very productive organization. They have a charter, and they have a standing...
and it sounds like we're out of time, but it sounds like they have a focus. And
they do.
They know what they're doing.
They have a focus.
And you're playing a major role in that. Daryl Watson, thank you for coming by. We appreciate so much. This is very informative, not only to our viewers here in Idaho, but in the adjoining states and into Canada, and it's very relevant. We thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we know that our program has been informative to you on a very important subject, and we hope that you can use this to help yourself be more safe and to work with these entities as we deal with protecting ourselves from any threats it might be, or even assisting us when there's natural disasters. I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we, as we always do, will move to yet another issue. And one of the things this program does is try to have a great variety of subjects throughout the year, and we hope that is what you want. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.